160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the 160th SOAR, the Night Stalkers. He had them flown in an emergency lift from Pope Air Force Base or Pope Army Airfield in Fort Bragg, which is where they live, to Mildenhall. And there they, MH-60 helicopters, the direct action penetrators, CV-22 Osprey, MH-22 Osprey special operations tilt rotor aircraft. And we saw in the photographs today the OH-6 Little Bird helicopter that has a capacity of 4, plus the pilot and the co-pilot, operating as an aerial sniper platform. They must have flown from England in steps and landed on the Coast Guard cutter and used it as a lily pad. And they flew over, landed some armed force on the vessel, and carried out a regular old visit board search and seizure.
Hello and welcome back to Times Radio. I'm Louis Sykes. Now, as we are speaking, the US has just confirmed that they have seized a Russian-flagged tanker that ran a blockade outside of Venezuela earlier this week. Now, we're joined to discuss this by Malcolm Nance. He is a former cryptologist in the US Navy. Malcolm, welcome back.
Always good to be here.
What do you make of this then, Malcolm, and how has the US managed to get a hold of this tanker?
Well, I'm glad that I'm talking about this because this is one of the simpler activities that navies do, which is to track, trace, and then, if necessary, seize ships that are carrying illicit cargo, ships that are carrying, things that are sanctioned. This ship which is a super tanker that had just run out of the blockade from Venezuela, one of 14 ships that apparently sortied en masse. There's a story that they've also seized the second one, but this one is special because it apparently, with the permission of the Russian state, reflagged itself midway. As it was coming out of the Caribbean, they painted a huge Russian Federation flag on the front of the ship, and and of course changed its AIS. There's a system that we use. It's sort of like how can I put it? It's like Waze or Google Maps. It shows you everybody that's out there, called AIS, the Automated Identification System, that shows where every tanker in the world is. They changed it, changed the name of the vessel on it, made it so that it looked that it was operating off of West Africa when it was in fact going up the central Atlantic and heading towards what people believe was Murmansk, right? Doing the Murmansk run. But this sort of operation of us noticing that's routine. We do this. We have entire centers based on this. NATO operates a naval and maritime operations center out of London, and using NATO assets to do generic intelligence collection or tracking. Using the PA Poseidon aircraft that fly out of Rota, Spain. We saw that one deployed to Mildenhall this week, ran right out, saw the ship, we literally put eyes on the ship, did some laps, came back. And at that point, we have what's called a datum. A datum is a last known visual or solid positioning of that ship. And so as it continues on its track, the only thing it can do is change course. We know as this expanding circle of range goes around, we keep collecting on it and we keep making sure that the vessel is on its course and speed. And then, as you saw today, we do what's called a visit board search and seizure, VBSS. Oh, these things are common as dirt. We do it in the Middle East all the time, doing it off of Yemen with alarming regularity. I've done it in the Arabian Gulf against Iraqi sanction breakers way back in the 1980s. This is a pretty common thing. But the question is, what's the geopolitical component of this, and how will that play out?
Indeed. And just on that VBSS search, how exactly is that carried out? Because we've seen video footage earlier this month or earlier last year of American soldiers literally rappelling onto the deck of some of these
Right.
sanctioned vessels. I assume this is going to be a pretty similar operation that will have happened today. And
Well,
how
generally,
I know you say that those things are done very often, but obviously the US military does do dangerous stuff quite often. How risky is that for those troops coming down off a helicopter onto a moving ship?
well, coming down on the ship isn't particularly hard because it's the size of 4 or 5 football pitches, right? And as wide as a full football pitch. So, relatively safe for people who are trained in this. However, this particular VBSS is not being carried out in a routine fashion. We had a Coast Guard vessel shadow this ship. And usually we do VBSS through either naval security forces that have been trained in that or Coast Guard maritime security force that is actually full time, 24/7, 365. This is all they do, right? And the Coast Guardsmen are particularly good at this because they know where to search. If it's illicit weapons, they know everything about a vessel, right? Their job is to make sure that the vessels are not only just afloat, but also safe. So they are completely trained on how to identify vessels, go through its paperwork, making sure that it is the vessel that it is, going through the ship's crew, going through compartments to see if there's illicit material other than giant, mega gallons of oil. This one appears to be different. This shows that since Venezuela, the Trump administration is madly in love with the U.S. Special Operations Forces. And the Coast Guard already had vessels, boats, um, and a ship that could have stopped the ship. It could have just fired a shot across its bow, as we do, hauled it over, which means to make it stop, go over in a rigid hull inflatable boat, and search the ship or seize the ship. Also, they have Coast Guard Dauphin helicopters. Now, you can do the same thing, land right on the deck, get off, seize control of the vessel. Trump did a special mission. I guess he just loves how special forces in the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the 160th SOAR, the Night Stalkers, he had them flown in an emergency lift from Pope Air Force Base or Pope Army Airfield in Fort Bragg, which is where they live, to Mildenhall, and there they MH-60 helicopters, the direct action penetrators, CV-22 Osprey, MH-22 Osprey special operations tilt rotor aircraft. And we saw in the photographs today the OH-6 Little Bird helicopter that has a capacity of 4, plus the pilot and the co-pilot, operating as an aerial sniper platform. Those helicopters have really short legs. I mean, really short legs. So they must have flown from England in steps and landed on the Coast Guard cutter and used it as a lily pad. Even though the Coast Guard cutter could take the bigger helicopters, they apparently wanted to use that. They're fast, they're light. Um, and they flew over, landed some armed force on the vessel, and carried out a regular old visit board search and seizure. But by exposing craft like the Little Birds to the Central Atlantic, I mean, that's risky. These things are light. They bounce a lot. They have a risk of going down. All of every helicopter does, right? You never know. You get that chip light, or you lose power, and suddenly you're a multi-million-dollar special operations aircraft. Next thing you know, you're a lifeboat. So these are very. I mean, the fact that he wanted them to do it is an indicator of the White House's affection for their ability to carry out difficult missions, although this wasn't a particularly difficult mission.
And we, as you mentioned there, this ship was originally called the Bella One. It changed its name
Right.
to the Marinera and started
Marinara.
flying that massive Russian flag painted onto the vessel. Um, is this a kind of scare tactic? Are they just trying to draw the Russians in to make people have second thoughts about seizing the vessel? Does it change the legal ramifications of? I mean, it'll certainly change the diplomatic ramifications, but does it change the naval legal ramifications of seizing the ship when it's supposedly under Russian control? Why do this, do you think?
Well, this is really just a power play about taking everything that they think that's coming out of Venezuela. I mean, you heard Trump say a few days ago that this is his oil. All right, he believes that this is his property, which is funny because this is a drop in the bucket in the oil industry, right? One ship is nothing. And the Bella, which was now the Marinera, which I find is a hilarious name, by the way, you know, because it's in a tangled weave of spaghetti, right? Spaghetti marinara, on which has seafood in it. Uh, I think I mean, I really do think that they chose that name quite carefully, but by painting that flag on there, they introduced a factor of uncertainty that no tactical commander would just sit there and say, "Well, we're going to board it." He would have to go get higher authority. It also shows how Russia plays us. Okay, this is not just one ship. This is one of 88 shadow tankers that belong to the Russian Federation that routinely smuggle oil from Venezuela, Iran, to other ports around the world that defy the U.S. sanctions against Russia. For that, some of them are tasked to carry out vandalism, or I should call it international disruption operations, hybrid warfare operations, where they drag their anchor quite deliberately over transatlantic internet cables to destroy them. We just saw that the Finns boarded one of these shadow fleet tankers just recently because it was dragging its anchor. And I mean, when you lay your anchor on the bottom and keep the ship moving at 10 knots, you're going to destroy everything on there. And it was out to cut the cables between Finland and the other Baltic states. That's a pre war activity, right? Hybrid warfare is all the activities leading right up to the edge of war, which you could argue is it has a political and diplomatic bent to it. So for this vessel is just going to be the beginning tip of the iceberg for this. But I don't understand U.S. policy related to it. Again, it's almost as if we think we own these things, and the legal basis of it is going to come out in courts. Look, you've got Maduro in the last when he was arraigned, arguing that he was an abductee as a head of state, and that violates virtually every treaty the United States has signed with regards to the management of, or the maintenance and management of head of states. And, the Treaty of Vienna of 1898, the Treaty of Vienna modification in 1949. All of these things come into play. Now, will it change anything on the ground? Probably not.
And there were supposedly Russian vessels nearby, including a Russian submarine. I mean,
Yeah.
there's presumably not much that a submarine can do about an aerial interdiction, but I mean, I assume we're not going to see Russian Spetsnaz or Russian Marines now dropping onto this boat as well in response.
Well, first off, there is no real evidence that any Russian warship is out there. There have been reports. Let me tell you what's not going to happen. Okay. I'm an old, I know I'm an old, Navy guy, an old cryptologist, but I am submarine qualified. I rode submarines in submarine special operations. And let me tell you something. You are not tasking a nuclear powered vessel to go down there to track a merchant tanker full of oil. Okay. It's not like it's a Russian spy ship or something that's about to be seized, right? Also, that is old Cold War behavior, right? They go, let's sortie 3 corvettes out of Murmansk, and the entirety of NATO goes crazy of it. I don't think there's any Russian warships down there. Maybe there's a fishery boat or something that's in the immediate area. But why bother? The crew is telling you everything you need to know on Facebook, uploading images of the exact seizure. So that's all you really need to know. And there's no, I mean, you get the people who go, Third World War is going to come from this. Really? No, no, nothing's going to come from this at all.
And just finally, Malcolm,
Mm.
there's been a lot of stress on the NATO alliance. I think it's fair to say
Mm.
over the last year, and certainly in recent weeks, big questions about whether the US really values that alliance or whether it's willing to put it at risk over things like Greenland. Does this restore some level of faith in the fact that there is still a strong alliance between European nations and the Americans. As you say, American vessels operating in the North Atlantic, American aircraft flying out of British and Spanish bases. Does this at least signal to us that there is still an operational level of alliance going on between Europe and America?
Well, there's an operational level. We're still having exercises, but this particular instance shows no NATO cooperation whatsoever. Let's just be frank, certainly for your British audience. The United States flew into Britain and used you as a lily pad, used you as a landing base to go do an operation that doesn't involve them. You said there was a report that British intelligence aircraft were supporting, maybe, but flying your RC 135 rivet joint signals intelligence aircraft is a routine factor for England. And in fact, I mean, you can always divert a little bit to the northwest over the Faroes, get a line of bearing on that ship, and then go back over to your routine mission off of Ukraine. That's what rivet joint is really used for. So I mean, it's a strategic intelligence asset. You're not going to do that to go track a, Bodie McBoatface, right? To get a bit of oil out of them. So I see the strain is very serious, and your country in particular is going to have to figure out where they're coming down because. And we'll talk about this at some future date. I'm headed back to Greenland again about whether the United States is now acting as an imperial power and not as an ally in seizing a NATO country's territory, which is not good. It means that the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which won't break up, by the way, it will be instead of 32 nations, it will become 31 nations. It'll be everyone minus America. And there are strategic implications for this. Again, I wrote a book about Trump, three New York Times bestsellers about Trump and his relationship with Russia. And I say this as an intelligence professional. If Moscow sent him as a trained agent, he couldn't do more damage to the United States and the entire Western alliance since World War II. It's almost as if this is revenge of the Cold War and ending America's relationship with Europe appears to be the goal. And that is the goal of the tripolar world that Trump, Putin, and Xi appear to have agreed upon, whereas America gets the Western Hemisphere, Russia gets control of Europe. But Europe has something to say about this. Your 31 countries, when combined, have a bigger naval force than the United States, have more aircraft than the United, count the numbers, than any other country. And now, if you include Ukraine, the biggest army in Europe and the most professional army in Europe. So I wouldn't like to see the United States screw up, withdraw, or try to break the Atlantic Alliance. Because the first thing I would do if I was a European, I would say, Ukraine, you're in. You're now part of NATO. We're back to 32 countries. That would create a force to be really reckoned with.
Well, lots more to chat about in the coming weeks,
Mm.
Malcolm, I'm sure. Malcolm Nance, intelligence and foreign policy analyst and former cryptologist in the US Navy. Thank you very much for speaking with me today.
My pleasure.